My name is Mary E. Webb. I'm 33 years old, and the moment my father spoke those words at the dinner table, I knew my parents would never be part of my daughter's life the way I once hoped. Lily isn't biologically mine. She's my husband Derek's daughter from a previous relationship, and her mother left when she was barely 2. I met Derek when Lily was 3, all knees and questions and soft curls she refused to let anyone brush. She doesn't call me Mom, not because I don't want her to, but because I refuse to force something that should be hers to choose. Still, when she wakes from nightmares and crawls into my arms or asks me to braid her hair before school because the other girls' moms do it, I don't feel like a substitute. I feel like a mother in the truest sense of the word. My parents never saw it that way. Thanksgiving at their house was always a performance. Perfect table, polished silverware, the kind of meal designed more for appearances than warmth. We were invited, of course. Derek, Lily, and me. But the tension was waiting for us before the door even opened. My father answered, looked down at Lily holding Derek's hand, and stepped aside without a word. His smile was tight, like he was letting a stranger pass through his space. Inside, my mother was already halfway through a bottle of wine, pearls at her throat like armor. She didn't even look at Lily when she spoke. "Still can't believe you married a man with a kid," she said lightly, as if it were a joke she'd been saving. I said nothing. I always said nothing. I kept thinking that if Lily was sweet enough, polite enough, quiet enough, they would eventually soften. They never did. Dinner moved forward in strained politeness. Lily sat beside me, napkin folded carefully in her lap, whispering thank you when Derek passed her the potatoes. She was perfect in the way children become when they sense they are being judged. And then, just after we started eating, my father lifted his wineglass, looked directly at Derek, and said it. "She's not a real grandchild." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The words landed exactly where he intended. Lily heard it. She didn't ask what it meant. She simply stopped chewing, lowered her fork, and stared at her plate. No one spoke. Not my brother, not his wife, not even my mother. They all kept eating, as if nothing had happened. Derek reached for his glass, took a slow sip, tapped it gently against the table, and said calmly, "At least now we know who the smallest person at this table really is." The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was final. We left early. No excuses, no confrontation. I buckled Lily into her car seat, and she watched the streetlights pass without saying a word. In the garage, Derek turned to me and said, "We're done trying." I knew exactly what he meant. Not just dinners, not just holidays, everything. That night, without anger or ceremony, Derek closed the account they used for emergencies. The card that had paid for their car repairs, vet bills, and groceries stopped working. The quiet monthly transfers ended. I asked if we should warn them. Derek shook his head and said they'd had years. 3 weeks later, my mother called from the pharmacy. Her card had been declined. She asked me to tell Derek to fix it. I told her it was over. She accused me of letting a man come between me and my parents, then hung up. That was the beginning. After Thanksgiving, nothing exploded. It just unraveled. Slowly, quietly, the way things do when they've been held together by denial for too long. My parents didn't notice at first. They were used to life working out. Used to Derek quietly stepping in when something broke, when a bill was overdue, when an appliance died at the worst possible moment. We never announced the help. We never asked for thanks. It had simply become part of the background noise of our relationship, like it was always meant to be that way. The first week passed without a word. The second, too. I almost let myself believe they wouldn't connect the dots, that maybe they'd adjust, maybe this would force a reckoning without another confrontation. But denial has a shelf life, and when it expires, it curdles into entitlement. My mother was the first to call. Her voice was clipped, tight, the way it gets when she's trying to sound calm in public but can't quite hide the irritation underneath. She said her card had been declined at the pharmacy, asked if Derek had changed something. There was no question in her tone, just an assumption that this was a mistake we would immediately correct. I told her the card wasn't active anymore, that we wouldn't be covering expenses going forward. There was a pause, long enough for me to imagine her standing there with a line forming behind her. Then she said, "I can't believe you'd let your husband control you like this." And she hung up. The next day, my father emailed me. bullet points. He always did that when he wanted to sound reasonable, like he was presenting facts instead of issuing a threat. He wrote that I'd chosen someone else's child over my own family, that Derek was isolating me, that blood mattered. At the bottom, he added a line that felt rehearsed. When that man leaves you, and he will, don't come running back. I read it twice, then deleted it. Derek didn't speak until I told him what it said. Then he looked at me and said something I hadn't considered. They're not angry because we stopped helping. They're angry because they assumed we never would. That was when the calls started coming from other directions. My brother rang one night, his voice tense, unfamiliar. He said Mom and Dad were in trouble. Their second mortgage was months behind. They'd tried to refinance, but no bank would touch them with their credit. They were asking him for money now. He told them no. He said he wasn't going to keep lighting himself on fire so they could stay warm. I asked if he was okay. He said he was fine, just done. A few days later, my mother messaged me through Facebook, not even a call. She said they were struggling, that they weren't asking for much, that I should think about what family really means. Derek didn't comment when I showed him. He just kept stirring Lily's hot cocoa, the steam fogging his glasses. That night, he told me something I hadn't known. For almost a year, he'd been quietly covering their second mortgage. He hadn't told me because he didn't want me to worry. I thought I was buying you peace, he said, but I'm not buying silence anymore. January stripped away whatever pride my parents still had left. The holidays were over, the bills arrived. The silence they'd used as punishment turned into desperation. My brother texted me late one night, no greeting, just a warning. He said Mom and Dad were talking to someone who helped when banks said no. High interest, no patience, the kind of loan that eats people alive. He said he wasn't calling to ask me to help. He just didn't want me blindsided if things got ugly. I sat on the couch, staring at my phone, while Lily built a tower out of blocks on the rug, knocking it over and laughing like it was the best joke in the world. Derek hummed in the kitchen while he cooked dinner, like everything was normal. And in that moment, I realized how separate our lives had become from theirs. 2 different worlds, 2 different realities. A few days later, my mother called again. This time, she sounded tired. No edge, no lecture. She said they'd been under a lot of stress, that things weren't working out the way they planned. She said she missed me, missed our talks, missed the holidays. She never mentioned Lily, not once. I told her I had to go, that Lily needed me, and I hung up before she could say anything else. That night, Derek looked at me and said, "They're testing the door." A week later, my father called. Then again, when I didn't answer, he left a voicemail. He said they were behind on the mortgage, that the bank wasn't flexible, that he wasn't asking for money, but maybe Derek could help them get a loan, co-sign something, just temporarily until things stabilized. He said family helps family. I listened once, then again. Then I deleted it. All I could hear beneath his words was panic, the same panic he used to mock in other people. And then they showed up. I came home from picking Lily up from preschool and found an envelope wedged into our door. No stamp, no return address, just my mother's handwriting. The letter inside was long, carefully written, every sentence polished. She said they were sorry for misunderstandings, that words had been said in the heat of the moment, that they wanted to rebuild the bridge, that family was everything. Halfway through, she mentioned Lily. She wrote that they were willing to try, that they were ready to accept her, that they didn't want to lose their granddaughter. I sat at the kitchen table holding that letter, reading the same lines over and over. These were the words I'd wanted to hear for years, but the timing was wrong. Derek read it once and handed it back to me. "They're not changing," he said. "They're negotiating." And deep down I knew he was right. 3 days after the letter, the line they'd been testing finally snapped. I didn't find out until that evening, when Derek came home earlier than usual and set his bag down without the usual sigh. He went straight to the sink, poured a glass of water, drank half of it in one pull, then said casually, "Your dad stopped by my office today." The room tilted. Derek worked in a small commercial design firm. Visitors didn't just wander in, they had to ask. They had to wait. They had to be buzzed through, which meant my father had shown up, asked for him by name, and sat there until someone let him in. Derek told me my father said he was worried about me, said I wasn't acting like myself, said I'd changed since we got married. He asked if Derek thought therapy might help me reconnect with my family. I felt the cold spread through my chest in a way that had nothing to do with fear. They weren't asking for help anymore. They were trying to reframe the story so that when help arrived, it wouldn't look like leverage. It would look like intervention. Derek finished his water and handed me his phone. He'd already pulled the email up. The sender name was blank, just an address I didn't recognize. Attached was a PDF. Inside were bank statements, overdue notices, frozen accounts, a foreclosure warning on their second mortgage. At the bottom, a short note. We're not asking for handouts, just guidance. Please don't let her make a decision that hurts everyone. They went around me. They tried to make my husband doubt me. They tried to turn my steadiness into instability and my boundaries into danger. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I walked to the hallway closet and pulled out the storage bin with Lily's things. The baby blanket she came home in, the zoo photo from the day she called me Manda by accident and then refused to stop. Crayon drawings folded so many times the paper was soft. I sat on the floor and breathed until the shaking passed. Family isn't who pressures you when the money dries up. Family is who protects the child sleeping down the hall. The next morning I wrote them an email. I told them we wouldn't be helping financially. I told them they were no longer welcome to contact Derek, directly or indirectly. I told them that any further manipulation would be documented and met with a formal cease and desist. I ended with one line, "You made your choice at the table." There was no reply. A week later, my mother texted a photo instead. Her and my father standing in front of a small brick church holding hands, like characters in a redemption montage. We've started counseling. We're trying. Please don't give up on us. I didn't respond. I stared at that picture everywhere. At the grocery store, in the car line at preschool, late at night when the house was quiet. I couldn't tell if it was real change or a better costume. Derek noticed before I admitted it. He said I'd been distant since the photo arrived. I told him the truth, that I didn't know how to feel, that I kept thinking about 10 years from now, about Lily asking why she didn't know her grandparents, about not having a clean answer. He didn't argue. He just asked, "Do you think they've earned another chance?" 2 days later, a long message arrived. Too polished, too careful. They wrote about mistakes, about counseling forcing hard conversations, about selling the second car, cutting up credit cards, meeting with a debt counselor. My mother mentioned taking a part-time job. They named Lily by name and wrote a sentence that stopped me cold. "We saw her as a symbol of your choices, not as a person. That's on us, not her." It was the first time they'd named the root of it without deflecting. I told Derek I was thinking about a short visit, supervised, neutral, a park, no promises. He listened and then said quietly, "They didn't just say terrible things. They tried to unmake you. You can forgive that if you want. Lily won't pay for it." We waited. A week passed. Then another. No messages. No pressure. Then an envelope appeared in the mailbox. Inside was a photo of a small apartment with secondhand furniture and boxes still sealed. A handwritten note. "We sold the house. We're moving. No expectations. Just wanted you to know we're starting over." I left the note on the counter for 2 days. It sat between Lily's drawings and the grocery list. Derek didn't comment. On the third morning, I wrote back. I told them I got the photo, that I respected the work they were doing, and that we weren't ready to include them in Lily's life, not now. Maybe one day, if this was real, they'd keep doing the work without us watching. I pressed send and waited, and they didn't reply. 4 months passed. The quiet settled into something almost peaceful, until spring, when a number I didn't recognize texted me. "Hi, Mary. It's Susan from your mom's church group. She thought you might want to meet sometime. No pressure." The next day, another message from a different number, inviting Lily to kids' activities. My mother had given out my number, again. Wrapped control in kindness. I called the church, thanked them, declined, and asked directly if my mother had shared my contact. The pause told me everything. That night, I wrote one last email. I told my mother that involving strangers was a breach, that it showed me exactly how much of the change was performance. I asked for space. I said, "We're done. Not through people, not through places, not at all." She didn't respond. I blocked her number. Derek blocked it too. The house went quiet in a new way. Lily slept. Pancakes happened on Sundays. Hearts got shaped just for her. 6 months later, the silence held. Lily started kindergarten. Derek got promoted. I stopped flinching at the phone. When a church contact reached out again, I didn't engage. I blocked. I chose my family, the one I built, not the one that tried to spend me. Some healings don't look like reunions. Sometimes they look like protecting the child you love from the weight you carried. That's what I did. That's what I'll keep doing. The months that followed felt deceptively calm, the kind of calm that makes you wonder what's happening just outside your line of sight. My parents didn't call. They didn't text. No envelopes appeared in the mailbox. On the surface, it looked like they had finally respected the boundary I set. But calm has a way of revealing truth when you stop mistaking noise for connection. Life with Derek and Lily settled into a rhythm that felt earned. Mornings were loud and messy, backpacks forgotten, cereal spilled, hair braided in a rush. Evenings were quieter, books on the couch, Lily's feet tucked under my leg while Derek talked about work. It struck me how little space anxiety took up now that I wasn't constantly anticipating a crisis. I hadn't realized how much of my energy had been spent managing my parents' emotions until I stopped doing it. Then the cracks started showing in places I wasn't expecting. My brother called one night, his voice low, careful. He told me our parents had sold the house faster than planned and moved into the apartment they mentioned. He said it wasn't just downsizing. They were scrambling. The second mortgage had nearly gone into foreclosure. They'd been late on utilities more than once. He said they were trying to borrow money again, not from banks this time, but from people who didn't ask many questions. He wasn't asking me to help. He said that explicitly. He just wanted me to know, in case things got ugly. I thanked him and hung up, staring at the dark window over the sink. Derek noticed immediately. He asked what was wrong. I told him everything. He didn't look surprised. He said softly, "This is what happens when leverage stops working." A week later, the first indirect contact arrived. Not from my parents, but from someone else. A friend of my mother's, someone I barely knew, messaged me saying my mom was having a hard time and could really use a familiar face. I didn't respond. 2 days after that, another message, this time from a distant relative asking if I'd heard from my parents lately. The pattern was familiar. When direct access was blocked, they widened the net. I told Derek I was worried, not about them, but about the way this always escalated. He listened, then said something that grounded me. "You can care without being available," he said. "You're not responsible for the outcome of choices you didn't make." The next move crossed a line. Derek came home from work one afternoon unusually quiet. He sat at the table, set his keys down carefully, and said my father had shown up again. This time not to talk, but to leave documents. Financial statements, notices, a letter from a lender that wasn't a bank. My father told Derek he was just being transparent, that he didn't want secrets between family. He suggested that if Derek helped restructure things, it would protect everyone, including me. He implied that I was being emotional, that I might regret my decisions later. That was the moment it clicked completely. They weren't trying to reconcile. They were trying to regain control through a different door. When guilt didn't work, they tried concern. When concern didn't work, they tried fear. And when fear didn't work, they tried to undermine me where I felt safest. I wrote another email that night. Short, direct, no explanations. I told them they were not to contact Derek again, that any further attempts to involve him would be documented, that if they needed help, they should seek it from professionals, not family members they had already disrespected. I didn't ask for understanding. I didn't offer forgiveness. I pressed send and closed my laptop. There was no reply. Instead, a photo arrived a few days later. My parents standing outside that same small church, hands clasped, faces solemn. A caption followed. "We're doing the work. Counseling. Community. Faith. We're changing. Please don't shut us out forever." I stared at the photo longer than I wanted to admit. Change is seductive when you've been waiting for it your whole life, but timing matters, and so does pattern. Derek watched me quietly, then said, "If it's real, it will still be real without an audience." So I waited. Waiting turned out to be the hardest part. Not responding took more discipline than any confrontation ever had. The photo from the church sat in my phone like a question I didn't want to answer, resurfacing at odd moments when I least expected it. Standing in line at the grocery store, sitting in the carpool lane watching Lily wave at her friends, folding laundry late at night when the house was quiet enough for old habits to whisper. Every time, the same thought crept in. What if this time is different? What if they finally understand? What if I'm the one standing in the way of healing now? Derek never pressured me. He didn't roll his eyes or tell me I was being naive. He simply asked the same question in different ways, over and over, until I answered it honestly for myself. Are they asking for access or offering accountability? Are they respecting the boundary or testing it? Are they changing because it's right or because it's necessary? Those questions became my filter. A week passed, then another. There were no calls, no surprise visits, no intermediaries. The quiet was unfamiliar, and that in itself felt significant. I started to notice how my body reacted to it. My shoulders weren't constantly tense. I wasn't scanning my phone before bed. Lily slept through the night. Derek came home lighter, less guarded. We made pancakes on Sunday mornings, heart-shaped ones just for Lily, and I realized how much space had opened up once I stopped living on alert. Then another message arrived. Longer this time. My parents wrote about counseling in detail, about how uncomfortable it was to hear themselves described by a therapist, about selling the second car, about meeting with a debt counselor and cutting up credit cards. My mother wrote that she had taken a part-time job and was learning how to budget without leaning on anyone else. My father wrote that he was embarrassed by how long he'd pretended everything was fine. They mentioned Lily again, by name, and said they understood now that they had treated her as a symbol instead of a child, that they were ashamed of that they wanted to start over slowly with no expectations. I read it twice, then a third time. The words were better, more specific, less defensive. But words had never been their problem. Timing was. I told Derek I was considering a short meeting, neutral place, public, no Lily, just to see. He didn't say yes or no. He asked me what I was hoping to feel afterward. Relief, clarity, peace. I couldn't guarantee any of those. That was my answer. Instead of replying, I waited again. 3 days later, an envelope appeared in our mailbox. No stamp, no return address. Inside was a photo of a small apartment, secondhand furniture, boxes stacked against the wall. A handwritten note said they had sold the house and moved. No expectations. Just wanted me to know they were starting over. I placed the note on the counter between Lily's half-colored drawings and the grocery list. I left it there untouched for 2 days, letting it exist in the same space as our ordinary life. On the third morning, I wrote back. I told them I received the photo. I told them I respected the steps they were taking. I told them that right now we were not ready to include them in Lily's life. Not now. Maybe one day. If the work they were doing was real, it would continue with or without us watching. I didn't apologize. I didn't soften it. I pressed send and closed the laptop. They didn't reply. 4 months passed. The silence held. Lily started kindergarten. Derek was promoted. I slept better. The phone stopped feeling like a threat. I allowed myself to believe that maybe this was the end of it, not because they'd been forgiven, but because they'd finally accepted that they weren't entitled to us. Then spring came, and with it, a text from a number I didn't recognize. A woman from my mother's church group. Friendly, casual. She said my mom thought I might want to meet. No pressure. The next day, another message. This one from a youth coordinator, inviting Lily to activities. I felt the heat rise in my chest. I hadn't mentioned Lily to anyone. I hadn't responded to a single message. And yet my mother had found a new way in. I called the church. I was polite. I declined. And I asked directly if my mother had shared my contact information. The pause told me everything. She had. That night, I wrote one final email. I told my mother I knew what she'd done, that involving strangers, especially in a space we didn't share, was a breach, that it showed me how much of the change was still strategic. I asked for space and made it clear. No more contact. Not through people, not through places, not at all. She didn't respond. I blocked her number. Derek blocked it too. The house stayed quiet. The quiet that followed wasn't dramatic. It didn't announce itself. It settled in slowly, like dust after a door closes, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't rush to wipe it away. Days stacked into weeks without interruption. No calls, no messages, no envelopes. The absence itself became the answer I'd been waiting for, not because it proved anything noble, but because it revealed what had always been true. When the pressure stopped, when the leverage disappeared, so did the performance. Life filled the space they left behind. Lily's kindergarten mornings were chaotic in the best way. Shoes mismatched, cereal spilled, hair braided too tightly and then redone. Derek learned which teacher preferred emails and which preferred a quick chat at drop-off. He came home later after his promotion, tired but lighter, like shedding the role of mediator had freed up something he didn't know he'd been carrying. I noticed the difference in myself, too. I slept through the night. I didn't brace when the phone buzzed. I stopped pre-writing explanations in my head. Sometimes the past tried to slip back in. A familiar car model would slow my breath. A church sign would twist something in my stomach. But the panic didn't take hold the way it used to. I had proof now, not of their change, but of my own. My brother called once, just to check in. He didn't ask questions. He didn't bring them up. He said he was proud of me for protecting Lily. He said it like a statement, not a consolation. That mattered more than he probably realized. I thought about forgiveness often, not as a destination, but as a decision that didn't belong to me alone. Forgiveness isn't a favor you grant to relieve someone else's discomfort. It's a boundary you choose when it's safe, and safety had never been their priority. Control had been. One afternoon, months later, I found the old church photo while cleaning out my phone. My parents standing outside the brick building, hands clasped, faces earnest. I studied it without flinching. I could believe they were trying. I could believe they meant it. And I could still choose not to invite them into Lily's life. Those things weren't opposites. They were simply truths that had learned to coexist. Derek asked me once if I thought they would ever understand. I told him I didn't need them to. Understanding wasn't the same as change. And change didn't require access to my child to be real. If they were different now, they would remain different without applause, without reconciliation, without the reward they seemed to expect. If they weren't, Lily would never know the cost. On a quiet Sunday, we sat on the floor with crayons spread everywhere, Lily drawing a family with stick figures and oversized smiles. She handed it to me and said, "This is us." No grandparents, no explanations, just the three of us, exactly as she knew us to be. I felt something settle in my chest, firm and calm. I used to think being a good daughter meant enduring, swallowing comments, financing comfort, making myself smaller so everyone else could feel whole. I was wrong. Being a good parent means refusing to pass that weight forward. It means choosing the people who choose your child without conditions. We didn't reconcile. We didn't stage a healing moment. We didn't rewrite the past. We built a present sturdy enough to stand on its own. That turned out to be enough. And when I think back to that Thanksgiving table, to the words that cut through the room and changed everything, I don't feel regret anymore. I feel clarity. Because that sentence didn't break us. It freed us.